Hi, I'm Linda, and I'm 48 years old. I work as a registered nurse at a busy hospital in Denver, Colorado. I'm a single mother who raised two children on my own after my husband left when they were just 7 and 10 years old. What I'm about to tell you is the story of how my greatest sacrifice was met with the cruelest dismissal, and how sometimes the children we love most can break our hearts in ways we never imagined possible. You know that feeling when you've saved every penny, taken time off work you couldn't afford to lose, and traveled across the country to celebrate someone's achievement? When you're bursting with pride and excitement to witness a milestone moment in your child's life? Well, I experienced the complete opposite of gratitude when I surprised my son Michael at his college graduation, only to receive a text message that said, "Why are you here? You didn't even help pay for it." Let me tell you the whole story, because this isn't just about one hurtful text message. This is about years of sacrifice, about a mother's love that was taken for granted, and about the moment I realized that financial support isn't the only way to show up for your children, but sometimes they can't see past the dollars to recognize the depth of your devotion. It all started when Michael was accepted to Stanford University 4 years ago. I remember the day the acceptance letter arrived. He was jumping around our small apartment, calling his friends, posting on social media about how he was going to be a Stanford graduate. I was proud, absolutely bursting with joy for him, but I was also terrified. Stanford's tuition was more than I made in an entire year as a nurse. Even with financial aid and scholarships, there would still be expenses I couldn't cover. Room and board, textbooks, living expenses, travel costs. It all added up to more money than I'd ever seen in one place. I sat Michael down that evening and had one of the hardest conversations of my life. I explained our financial situation with complete honesty. I told him how proud I was of his acceptance, how much I believed in his potential, but also how limited our resources were. "I can't pay for Stanford, honey," I said, my heart breaking as I watched his face fall, "but I will support you in every other way I can. We'll find a way to make this work." And we did find a way, though it wasn't the way either of us had originally envisioned. Michael took out student loans, worked part-time jobs throughout college, and applied for every scholarship and grant he could find. I helped him research financial aid options, proofread his scholarship essays, and provided emotional support through every stressful moment of his college journey. But apparently, none of that mattered when it came time for graduation. Apparently, love and support don't count if they don't come with a check attached. Over the 4 years Michael was at Stanford, I supported him in every way I possibly could, even if I couldn't write tuition checks. When he called stressed about midterms, I'd stay on the phone with him for hours, helping him organize his study schedule and reminding him that he was capable of handling anything. When he was overwhelmed by his course load, I'd send care packages filled with his favorite homemade cookies and encouraging notes. During his sophomore year, when he was struggling with organic chemistry and considering dropping his pre-med track, I drove 12 hours to California to spend a weekend helping him figure out his options. I couldn't afford a hotel, so I slept in my car in a Walmart parking lot, but I was there when he needed someone to talk through his fears and doubts. When Michael got mono during his junior year and missed 3 weeks of classes, I used my vacation time to fly out and take care of him. I made sure he was eating properly, helped him communicate with his professors about makeup work, and stayed until he was back on his feet. The plane ticket cost me 2 weeks' worth of groceries, but seeing him recover was worth every sacrifice. I celebrated every achievement with him, no matter how small. When he made Dean's List, I sent flowers to his dorm. When he got accepted into a competitive research program, I called every family member we had to share the good news. When he was selected for a summer internship at a prestigious hospital,
I was the first person he called, and I cried happy tears right there in the hospital break room. But I also supported him through every setback. When he didn't get into his first choice for medical school, I spent hours on the phone helping him process the disappointment and strategize his next steps. When his girlfriend broke up with him during finals week of senior year, I listened to him cry and reminded him that heartbreak was temporary, but his education was forever. Michael never seemed to resent my inability to pay for his education. In fact, he often told me how much he appreciated my emotional support. "Mom, you're my biggest cheerleader," he'd say during our weekly phone calls. "I don't know what I'd do without you." I thought we had an understanding. I thought he recognized that while I couldn't contribute financially, I was contributing in every other way possible. I was giving him something that money couldn't buy: unconditional love, unwavering belief in his abilities, and a constant reminder that someone was proud of everything he was accomplishing. As graduation approached, Michael seemed excited about the ceremony. He talked about how surreal it would be to walk across that stage, how proud he was of what he'd achieved despite the financial challenges. He mentioned that some of his friends' families were flying in for the ceremony, but he didn't specifically invite me, and I didn't want to assume I was welcome. That's when I decided to surprise him with the greatest gift I could give: my presence on his most important day.
3 weeks before Michael's graduation, I made a decision that would require every bit of resourcefulness and sacrifice I could muster. I was going to be there for his graduation ceremony, no matter what it cost me. The first challenge was getting time off work. As a nurse, requesting weekend time off during what would be a busy period wasn't easy, especially on such short notice. I had to trade shifts with 3 different colleagues, which meant I'd be working double shifts for 2 weeks straight leading up to the trip. I'd also have to work the night shift immediately after I returned, giving me less than 4 hours between landing and being back at the hospital. But the time off was the easy part compared to the financial logistics. The flight from Denver to San Francisco would cost $800 if I booked it immediately, money I absolutely did not have in my checking account. I had exactly $43 in savings after paying that month's bills. I started picking up extra shifts wherever I could find them. I worked overtime, covered for sick colleagues, and took on weekend shifts that I normally avoided because they interfered with my already limited personal time. For 3 weeks, I barely slept, surviving on coffee and the determination to be there for Michael's big day. I also had to get creative about accommodations. Hotels near Stanford during graduation weekend were completely booked or cost more per night than I made in a day. I found a youth hostel 40 minutes away that would let me stay for $60 a night. Not exactly comfortable for a 48-year-old nurse, but it was what I could afford. The flight itself would be a red-eye, arriving early Saturday morning with the ceremony scheduled for that afternoon. I'd have to fly back Sunday morning, which meant less than 36 hours on the ground, but it was the cheapest option available. I didn't tell anyone about my plan, not even my daughter, Sarah, who was working her first job after college and wouldn't have been able to help financially anyway. I wanted this to be a complete surprise for Michael. I imagined his face when he saw me in the audience, how touched he'd be that I'd found a way to be there despite all our financial constraints. I pictured taking photos of him in his cap and gown, maybe getting a picture together after the ceremony. I thought about how proud I'd feel watching him walk across that stage, knowing that despite not being able to pay for his education, I'd raised a son who was smart and determined enough to make it through Stanford on his own merit. The day before my flight, I was exhausted but excited. I'd worked 16-hour days for 3 weeks straight, survived on minimal sleep, and stretched every dollar as far as it could go. But I was going to be there for my son's graduation, and that felt like the most important thing in the world. I had no idea that my surprise would be met with anything other than joy.
The red-eye flight from Denver to San Francisco was everything I expected it to be: cramped, uncomfortable, and filled with travelers who looked as exhausted as I felt. I'd worked a double shift the day before, gotten home at 11 p.m., and had to be at the airport by 4 a.m. for my 6 a.m. flight. I was running on pure adrenaline and 2 cups of hospital coffee. But none of that mattered because I was finally doing it. After 3 weeks of planning and sacrifice, I was actually on my way to see Michael graduate from Stanford. Every time the exhaustion threatened to overwhelm me, I reminded myself why I was making this trip. This was a once-in-a-lifetime moment, and no amount of financial strain or physical discomfort was going to keep me from being there. The hostel was exactly as budget-friendly as advertised, a shared room with 4 bunk beds and travelers half my age who were backpacking through California. My roommates were sweet college kids who couldn't believe I was traveling alone to see my son graduate. They helped me figure out the public transportation to get to Stanford and even offered to let me borrow their phone charger when mine broke. "Your son is so lucky to have a mom who would come all this way," said Emma, a sophomore from Oregon who was traveling during spring break. "I bet he's going to be so surprised and happy to see you." I agreed with her completely. Michael would be thrilled. How could he not be? I'd moved mountains to be there for him. The morning of graduation was perfect. Sunny California weather with a gentle breeze. I put on the nicest dress I owned, the one I usually reserve for church and special occasions, and made my way to Stanford's campus. The energy was infectious. Families everywhere taking photos, graduates in their caps and gowns looking nervous and excited, vendors selling Stanford memorabilia. I found my way to the ceremony area and managed to get a decent seat, about halfway back from the stage. All around me, proud families were saving seats for relatives, setting up cameras, and chattering excitedly about their graduates' achievements. I felt like I belonged there, like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I tried texting Michael to let him know I was there, but realized he was probably busy with pre-ceremony preparations and wouldn't be checking his phone. I decided to wait until after the ceremony to surprise him. I wanted to see his genuine reaction when he spotted me in the crowd. As the graduates began filing in, my heart started racing with anticipation. I scanned the sea of caps and gowns, looking for Michael's familiar face. When I finally spotted him, walking tall and proud with his classmates, I felt tears spring to my eyes. This was my boy, my son who had worked so hard to get here, about to achieve something incredible. I was so proud, so grateful to be witnessing this moment that I completely missed the warning signs of what was coming next. The graduation ceremony was beautiful. I watched with tears in my eyes as Michael walked across that stage, shook hands with the dean, and received his diploma. 4 years of hard work, student loans, and determination had led to this moment, and I was there to witness it. I took pictures with my phone, trying to capture every second of his achievement. After the ceremony ended, families began gathering on the lawn for photos and celebrations. I made my way through the crowd, looking for Michael among the sea of graduates and their families. My heart was pounding with excitement. This was the moment I'd been dreaming about for weeks. I finally spotted him near a group of his classmates, and I started walking toward him with the biggest smile on my face. But as I got closer, I noticed something that made me pause. He was standing with what appeared to be another family, an older couple and a younger woman who were all dressed in expensive-looking clothes. They were taking photos with him, laughing and celebrating like they belonged there. For a moment, I wondered if I should interrupt. Maybe these were his girlfriend's parents or family friends who had supported him during college. But then I reminded myself that I was his mother. I had every right to be there, every right to congratulate my son on his graduation. I approached the group with a warm smile, ready to introduce myself and join the celebration. "Michael!" I called out, waving as I got closer. He looked up and saw me, and the expression that crossed his face wasn't joy or surprise. It was something much closer to panic. He quickly excused himself from the group and walked toward me, but
not with the enthusiasm of a son greeting his beloved mother. He looked like someone who had been caught doing something wrong. "Mom," he said, his voice tight with what I was starting to recognize as embarrassment. I didn't expect you to come." A few seconds later, my phone buzzed with a text message. I looked down at the screen and felt my world collapse around me as I read the words that would haunt me for months afterward. "Why are you here? You didn't even help pay for it."
I stood there on that beautiful Stanford lawn, surrounded by celebrating families, holding my phone with trembling hands as the cruelest words my son had ever spoken to me glowed on the screen. 4 years of emotional support, countless sacrifices, and 3 weeks of working myself to exhaustion to afford this trip, all dismissed because I hadn't written tuition checks. The well-dressed family was still watching us, and I could see Michael glancing between them and me, clearly calculating which relationship was more important to maintain in that moment. The answer was devastatingly clear. "I need to get back to my friends," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Thanks for coming, I guess." Thanks for coming, I guess. As if my presence was an inconvenience rather than an act of love. I watched him walk back to the expensive-looking family, watched him slide seamlessly back into their celebration as if I had never been there at all. The woman around my age, who I now realized must be his girlfriend's mother, put her arm around his shoulders and said something that made him laugh. The same laugh I used to hear during our weekly phone calls, when he'd tell me about his classes and his dreams. I left the campus without saying goodbye, walked to the nearest bus stop, and sat there crying until a kind stranger asked if I needed help. I managed to get back to the hostel, where my young roommates took one look at my face and immediately offered me tissues and kind words. "What happened?" asked Emma, the girl from Oregon. "Wasn't your son happy to see you?" I couldn't even explain it. How do you tell someone that your child reduced 4 years of unwavering support to a financial transaction? How do you explain that love, apparently, doesn't count unless it comes with a price tag? I flew back to Denver the next morning, returned to my regular nursing shifts, and tried to process what had happened. Michael didn't call to apologize or explain. Instead, I saw on social media that he'd spent the rest of graduation weekend with his girlfriend's family, posting photos of expensive dinners and celebrations that I clearly wasn't invited to join. 3 weeks later, he called as if nothing had happened, chatting about his post-graduation plans and job interviews. When I brought up his text message, he brushed it off as stress from graduation day. "I didn't mean anything by it, Mom. You know how hectic that day was." But I did mean something by my response. I told him that I loved him, that I was proud of his accomplishments, but that I was taking a step back from our relationship. If my presence was only welcome when it came with financial contributions, then perhaps it was time for him to learn what my absence actually cost. That was 6 months ago. We still talk, but less frequently, and the dynamic has shifted. He started asking about my life more, showing interest in my work and my feelings. Maybe the shock of losing his most reliable emotional support taught him something about value that can't be measured in dollars. I learned something too. Unconditional love doesn't mean accepting unconditional disrespect. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is show someone what they lose when they take your devotion for granted.
Do you enjoy stories with emotion and twists? Then like, subscribe, and activate the bell. Here, every word touches you.